Hello, everyone. My name is Byron Echeverria from Macmillan Publishers. First of all, I'd like to thank everyone in attendance for coming, both in person and virtually. I know we at Macmillan Publishers, HarperCollins and Norton and Simon & Schuster are very grateful for being able to present these four fantastic authors. I hope you have a good time and enjoy this evening's speeches. I think we should start off. First speaker, please start when you're ready.
That is me. My name is Celeste Headlee, and my book is called Speaking of Race, Why Everybody Needs to Talk About Racism and How to Do It. And I sat down to do this speech, and I started writing. The great James Baldwin once said, and then I thought, I wonder how many speeches start with that very line. Because the truth is that Baldwin said a lot of things better than anybody else has said them. And by that I mean he said them with such clarity. He said them so powerfully that there's actually no real point in trying to rephrase them. And so we're always quoting him. But the irony is that while he was still alive, we didn't actually listen to him. Not as a nation, we didn't listen. And if we did listen, we didn't believe him. And so in a certain sense, my book is designed to make sure that we never make that mistake again. This is the book for those who believe we can change things and they want to know how. Not in broad strokes, like have patience, but in really specific and actionable ways. How do we do this? Step by step. There's been a real resurgence in interest in James Baldwin's work, which is great. Sadly, that's probably because of the tragic events that have made it impossible for us as a nation to pretend that racism is not damaging and killing Black people. From Trayvon Martin to Alton Sterling and Philando Castile to Sandra Brown, Breonna Taylor, Tamir Rice, Eric Garner, Elijah McClain, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd. There are so many of them, and our hearts break in anguish. I mean, it makes me feel angry and also confused and also disappointed. But at the very least, most of the people in this country have finally accepted that racism is still with us, and that is endangering the lives of our coworkers and our friends and our neighbors. But sometimes we don't know what to say. It all seems so big and so awful and so unspeakable. And so we return to James Baldwin so he can say it for us. My question is, who is today's James Baldwin? Who is the person who is speaking with clarity and wisdom and insight that we are not listening to? That's what interests me. Because remember, James Baldwin once said, I was born almost 60 years ago. I'm not going to live another 60 years. You always told me it takes time. It's taken my father's time, my mother's time, my uncle's time, my brother's and my sister's time, and my niece's and my nephew's time. How much time do you want for your progress? James Baldwin died in 1987. And here we are, still believing ridiculous things about each other based on the color of our skin or our names. Still not listening to one another, still avoiding the conversation because we're afraid of an argument, or maybe we're afraid of being called a racist. So this book tries to let you know that the conversation is not as scary as you think. And also, if someone calls you a racist, that's not the end of the world. I mean, racism is awful, but you can come back from that. There's such a thing as redemption, if that's what you want. As I say in this book, there are two kinds of people in the world. There are those who have said the wrong thing about race, and there are those who will. And we have to end this together. And that means we all have to be willing to have some uncomfortable conversations. 5-minute conversations in the grocery store, 30-minute conversations over dinner at the holidays with our families, 10-minute conversations at a soccer game. We have to have so many of these conversations that they stop being scary. And this book aims to walk you through that process. Specifically, there are a lot of books out there that talk about talking about race, and they're all very valuable, but they mostly will give you the context of race or the history of race, why you don't touch a Black person's hair, why it's racist to refer to an Asian American as a model minority. This book is instead about how to get through that conversation step by step. It starts with why we have to have the conversation, and then it moves on to why this is so difficult, not just emotionally, but neurologically. What is going on inside our brains that makes it so hard for us to talk about this in an honest way and to tell the truth? Because, we don't tell the truth about race. There's one experiment I feature in which they gave people a list of behaviors, and they asked them to put a check mark near the things next to the things that they had done. Things like dressing as an Indian for Halloween, or laughing at a racist joke, all the way up to using the N-word or doing other things. Now, this was all anonymous in order to encourage people to be as honest as possible. And people marked down what things they had done, what things they had not done. And then sometime later, they brought these people back so that they could help evaluate other people's quizzes. And they said, we're going to give you someone else's list of things, the things that they've done, and we want you to tell us, how racist do you think this person is? And most people looked at the list and said, oh, I'm much less racist than this person. But it was their own list. So you see, we don't tell the truth even to ourselves about our biases, about our stereotypes, the assumptions we make, our fears. And it is so crucial that we begin by telling the truth to ourselves. And I know that's hard. It's hard to break through your unconscious biases, the stereotypes and racism and sexism and ageism, all those isms that have seeped into our subconscious through the TV that we've watched, the books we've read, what we heard from our grandparents, our teachers, our neighbors. That all lives somewhere in the wiring, the ghost in the machine. And it is so hard to dig out. And that's why we need each other to sometimes say, I know you're the kind of person who wants to be inclusive and anti-racist, and what you just said doesn't seem to align with who you want to be. I tried to be very honest in this book about the mistakes I've made, and I certainly did not even come close to listing them all, but I listed a few things I've done, like using the word gypsy, for example, using the word Eskimo. At one point, I referred to a paddy wagon, and an Irish person explained to me how heavily tinged that phrase is with anti-Irish bias. There are mistakes I've made when someone was generous enough to correct me, and I accepted the correction without thinking that it reflected catastrophically on my own character. At some point, I realized I could not possibly know everything that there is to know about every race and culture, and that means I need other people to step in and help me. I need to be the kind of person who welcomes correction. I need to be the kind of person who doesn't make other people feel afraid to point things out to me, to interrupt me when I'm saying something insensitive. That's the kind of person I need to be. And of course, it means I can't overreact when I'm corrected. You say to them, I apologize. I didn't realize what I said was offensive, but I'm not going to say it again. Do you have time to explain why to me? I can absolutely go and research it for myself if you'd rather not. I mean, on a basic level, why should we care if someone else is offended? What if we think they're being oversensitive? It's because you can't tell other people how to feel. You can't tell them what to be upset about. That's not for you to do. That's like stepping on somebody's toes and then telling them, stop crying, I didn't hurt you that badly. One of the things that prevents us from having a culture of correction and openness is this defensiveness we feel when we think someone has attacked us by saying we've said something racist. We live in a verbal society, and that means it's not very likely that someone's going to walk up and punch you in the face. But the attacks that we're subject to come in the form of verbal criticism. And for a human being throughout our history, social standing has meant the difference between life and death. Social standing to a human being is no laughing matter. And that's one of the reasons, by the way, that jokes are not acceptable, some jokes. Because social standing is the difference between life and death for our species, who is welcome in the community, who is ostracized. And so when someone criticizes you, maybe tells you that you've said something insensitive, your body and your brain react much the same way as they would if you were punched in the face. We respond as though that criticism was a physical attack, and maybe you feel that the criticism is totally unfair. After all, you see the injustice that racism has caused. You're angered by racial inequities. You're outraged that some people have lost their lives to racism. That's how you see yourself. But what you don't see, by definition, are your unconscious biases. They are unconscious. And when they leak out, because they always will, and someone points them out, you experience this cognitive dissonance. There's this vast gap between this action, this thing you just said, and what they're saying about you, that you said something racist. This idea that you have about yourself is different from what you did, and that's a painful place to be. The state of cognitive dissonance is painful, and you can relieve that pain either by saying, okay, you're right, that was racist, I'm going to fix this, or you can say, it wasn't racist, you're wrong. I want everyone to know that this is our work, that having these conversations is an expression of optimism. Especially white people, I want you to have the tools. This is an opportunity. This generation has a chance to change the history of the world. And statistics show that white people, especially white men, are the most convincing when it comes to these conversations about race. They are the least likely to suffer penalties for bringing it up, whereas people of color suffer greatly when they bring up issues of race, just like women suffer greatly when they bring up issues of sexism. So this book is for everyone, to give you tools and resources to help you feel strong psychological standing. But for white people, you can do this. You have the power to really do this. And I hope that's exciting to you. You can actually bring about real change. Most of us know that biological race is fictional. It's made up. It is not a thing. And yet race is real because racism is real. And because racism is everywhere, it is all around us. That's why we need to point it out whenever we can. Unconscious bias needs to become conscious. Implicit bias needs to become explicit. And we do that by not shying away, not running away, not avoiding holiday dinners if that one relative is going to be there. We have to understand that we all need one another, understand that we rely upon one another, and be as compassionate to ourselves as we want to be to others. Oh, and by the way, that James Baldwin quote that I wanted to start with was, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. I want to give you the tools in order to face it. Thank you so much.
Well, man, that's a really tough act to follow, but absolutely amazing. I'm so glad to be in the company of amazing writers who are doing the work, who are stepping outside of their comfort zone, who are recognizing that emotional maturity and emotional growth is one of the most revolutionary things that you can do. My name is Kimberly Jones. My book is How We Can Win, Race History, and Changing the Money Game That's Rigged. I have my own little like funny joke that I tell people, that I feel like my book is like social justice Forrest Gump. It's part memoir, it's part history lesson, it's part critical race theory, it's part finance. But the thing that is the most important about it is that it is my journey of walking into having to do this work. And it is not a shiny diamond version of that journey. It is a truthful journey, but it is a message to the impactfulness of teachers, of education, of guardians, of real shared community, and what that looks like and feels like, and how that can have an effect on a child, how that can make them interested in learning, how that can make a kid like me who is neurodivergent, who has to battle with ADHD, to learn to see myself as having a superpower, a way in which my brain works differently than everyone else's. And so I have to have new and exciting tools in order to teach my brain, because it's so unique. And so along that journey, I've had the opportunity, the magnificent opportunity, to walk into schools, particularly Title I schools, and talk to them and make them aware that hood kids could be heroes too. They look at my life. They look at what I've come through. They look at the experiences that I've had. My heart break. My heart break as I fight for my people, to just be able to be and to live the full lives that we are all worthy of, that our humanity grants us at birth. To talk about changing the way in which we train our officers so that they are not aspiring to be an ad that is someone jumping over the hood of the truck in order to be in combat with the people. But we must return to a community style where it's the man helping someone get the kitten out of the tree, the guardian of the community that we all deserve. Policing in the 21st century has had a severe change, and that effect has an economic component to it, as most things do. And so learning all of this in no way makes anyone feel any obligation to feel any less than human themselves. What it is asking people to do is to nurture empathy, which is what literature is magnificent at. Literature is magnificent at introducing people into a world that they'll never get to experience otherwise. And in that moment, and having those lived experiences on the page, imagining them, knowing what they look like, and doing so, it nurtures empathy in them. If we wonder why people are at such odds over this conversation as we speak right now, we'll have to acknowledge the fact that CRT has not actually been taught. And so this ability to nurture empathy in each other, which literature does masterfully, Every study that has been done about how it does nurture empathy. It allows for people to have a lived experience and a bird's eye view, particularly if it's written in own voices narrative, where you're getting a little piece of that person's story onto the page in a very authentic way, influenced by real experiences. It doesn't mean that they're saying someone cannot see the beauty in it. What it means is it's a lived experience. And to not have lived in it and to be able to wear it and take it off at its inconveniences is insulting to the weight of the people who are living it. And that is why books like How We Can Win are important, because it is an empathy nurturer. Because one of the things that I do at the end is I have an entire section called the 9 priorities. And through those 9 priorities, I'm teaching people that the most important thing that you can do, the most important thing that you can do, and the most revolutionary thing that you can do is self-improvement. Self-improvement is the most revolutionary thing any of us can do. Imagine if we all wake up tomorrow and decide we're going to be better, faster, healthier, more kind, patient, understanding. Would the world change? I think it would. So the first thing you can do, as the magnificent speaker before me said, is do the work on yourself and grapple with your own implicit bias. And once you do that, then you need to educate yourself on where the empathy roots from. And this is what How We Can Win does. It talks about where the empathy roots from. I know a lot of people find it funny. I talk about things like watermelon and where those derogatory terms come from and things like that. But what happens when everyone is nurturing empathy for each other and understanding root causes and getting down to the bottom of it, you're freeing people. You're freeing people from the things that weigh them down. And again, that is something that literature is a master of. Literature is an absolute master of making things so clear and plain through the eyes of the character that you embark on an adventure with. Whether that's fiction, nonfiction, science fiction, fantasy, contemporary love story. No matter where you find it, you find empathy. You feel an understanding. You get it for the first time. You now have a pathway to being a better version of yourself revolutionary the next day based on what you've learned. And now you have a hunger to learn more and to have more moments of empathy, to have better moments of understanding, to have a longer lived experience in the world of putting your guard down and trying to get it right. Because unifiers have proven to be the most memorable people of any time, of any struggle. Martin Luther King became very interesting to the world when he formed the Poor People's Movement. Fred Hampton with the Rainbow Coalition. Rudy Lozano with the Black and Brown Coalition. Unifiers are a memorable few, but impactful, and leave messages in the work they did, as did Frederick Douglass and W.E.B. Du Bois of the Reconstruction era, which I feel is one of the most important eras of our time. And I talk ad nauseum about why we should be in Reconstruction 2.0, how we should rectify the root problem with the root solution that was the most hopeful in the time in which we've spent. And when I think about deeply what it would look like to have Reconstruction 2.0, the first thing that I think about is making sure that we understand the economic connection to it all. Because although not easy to say, very difficult to look at combating, much of it was economic decisions. And so I wonder with time, as we grow to know more about each other, as we grow to love on each other, as we grow to linger in spaces where we can really call each other friend, where the trust has been earned and the time has been given to nurture healing, to grow empathy, to understand story, to find the community griots and hear the lessons that need to be learned, to learn how to appreciate something in opposition to other alternatives of praise. This week was a very interesting week for me as we talked about it being the 10th anniversary of the loss of the beloved Whitney Houston. And I had the fortune in my lifetime that I worked as a development assistant on the reality show Being Bobby Brown. And I shared a story this week about how when I was working for her, it was at the height of the world being very awful to her. And the newspaper, tell you how long ago it was the newspaper. I had a physical newspaper that had written this glowing review about her. And I didn't get to see her that often, but this particular day, I knew she was coming into the office and I had that article sitting in front of me. And boy, was I ready to tell her and show this to her. And she walks into the office, regal, as always. And I jumped out and I was like, Miss Houston, I want to show you this article. Oh my God, you have to see this article about you, Miss Houston. And she's like, no, thank you, baby. And I'm like, no. They talk about how you're the voice of a generation. And, I was just telling her all these accolades that are in the article and how she had to read it, how she absolutely had to read it. And she says, no, thank you, baby. She said, see, because if I believe them when they tell me I'm great, I have to believe them when they tell me I'm bad. So I don't read any of it. Whew. You're talking about a young, excited me feeling the wind fly out of me. But carrying that message with me even now as I navigate this world, because we have to learn to extend each other more grace. And we have to work deeper on grace and grace extension. Like, extending grace is so gangster and people don't see that. It's like in a world we live in right now where it's so easy to like create a fake account and troll someone, or, you know, just be awful and mean to each other. Have one bad experience at a business startup and go to Yelp immediately and don't give them the time to grow, particularly marginalized groups who have more difficult entree into entrepreneurship, which is, there's a lot of great programming. I'm happy to see that's coming together from city to city, different organizers that I'm talking to that are creating economic empowerment programs within that community. It's dope to see. But so having to do all of that, learning how to have the emotional maturity to know, as Miss Houston was trying to teach me that day, that what I need in order to do this work has to be inside of me. It has to be inside of me. And so the fact that it has to be inside of me means that I have to work on me. There's the revolution. There's the revolution. I am working on me. I'm going to therapy. I'm spending time with my family. I'm doing all these things. So I have a chapter where I talk about this, the 9 priorities for a balanced life. Because once I get you to see how we got here, and then I tell you how we can win and fix it, I want you to not even think about them until you do the last part first. And work on everything inside. And then that way we all win. Thank you guys for your time.
Thank you, Kimberly. That was brilliant. Thank you, Celeste. Kimberly felt a little bit humble to follow Celeste. So of course you guys put me after Kimberly. How do I feel? Thank you all for joining us. I really appreciate it. Please buy everyone's books, buy Kimberly's books, buy Celeste's book, and buy Maria's book. And thankfully, I will not upstage Maria, who will be ending the show today. Thank you all, fellow nerds, for being here, for celebrating books, literature, the power of literature and storytelling. I have released the book, Go Back to Where You Came From, and other helpful recommendations on how to become American, which I say is a memoir for the rest of us, an elegy for the rest of us, those who still have an asterisk next to their name as American, those who are still hyphenated, those who are both us and them, those who are both seen as citizens and suspects. It is about loving a country that doesn't love the rest of us back, but it is also a story about how we can build a multicultural coalition of the willing, or if you like comic books, which I do, a multicultural Avengers, or if you're a DC fan, the Multicultural Justice League, so that the rest of us can stretch and expand this thing called the American narrative and make the rest of us co-protagonists of this ongoing story, this rough draft of Americana. Oftentimes, the rest of us who have been villainized, stereotyped, sidekicked, or worst of all, completely excised from the story. And remember this, if there's only one wise thing I say today, if you aren't telling your story in America, your story is being told to you by others. And if you aren't telling your story is always being told to you by others. There's no reason for anyone to know me here because I haven't told you my story yet. Go back to where you came from and other helpful recommendations on how to become American. It hits you right out of the gate. The title punches you in the gut because for many of us, that's what we get told every day, even though I was born and raised in the Bay Area, California. I get told about 7 times a day, probably if I take my messages from Facebook, Proton Mail, Twitter, go back to where you came from. And I always want to respond, Fremont, California, I would love to go back to the Bay if I could afford the rent. If you're willing to subsidize, by all means, I'll go back. Do you want to go back? You want me to go back to my mother's womb? Because Freud says apparently that's where we all want to go. Or do you want me to go back to pre-partition India? And whenever you give this response, they usually, respond in very racist ways. The second email I get oftentimes is go F a goat or a camel. And for some strange reason, when you're Muslim and brown skinned, you get a lot of these fascinating emails where people are obsessed with bestiality and tell us to go F a goat or a camel. And I always ask and respond, why only goats and camels? And so the way to respond to some of this hate, the way to respond to this daily racism, the way to respond to these microaggressions is in the book and in life. I sometimes use humor, but humor used very deliberately to dismantle the stereotypes, to push back against the aggressors, but also sometimes to sweeten the medicine that we all need to understand this concept of the whiteness, which is what I describe in the book. Not white people, I'm talking about the whiteness as white supremacy, this system, this ideology, this paradigm that says the only protagonist of America has to be a white Christian male, and the rest of you, you're allowed to be here, but with conditions. And this book is about expanding that narrative of America and saying, you know what? I would like to be loved by my country without conditions. I would like to be not the exceptional Muslim or the exceptional brown man, but just an average American who doesn't want special standards, just equal standards. And so the book charts a narrative arc. And I talk about my humble origin story because I believe every superhero needs a humble origin story. The first chapter is create your own superhero origin story. I was born and raised in the Bay Area, California, to two Pakistani Muslim immigrant parents who thought it'd be hilarious to name their only son Wajahat to blend. I have a trisyllabic name, Wajahat, and believe it or not, in 2022, there's still not a Coke bottle with my name on it yet. My parents also thought it'd be hilarious not to teach me English, because who needs English in the United States of America? So I only knew 3 phrases of English when I was dropped off at Child's Hideaway Preschool. That was the name of the preschool, Child's Hideaway Preschool. The 3 phrases I knew were shut up, because my mother used to say shut up, idiot, because idiot used to follow shut up, and uh-oh, pasgerio, because I was born in the 80s and there was a Campbell soup commercial. So shut up, idiot, uh-oh, pasgerio. I, again, was named Wajahat. I was the only brown guy. I was the only Muslim guy. And school is oftentimes the first place where you learn your rank in the American hierarchy. You learn where you are in the caste, right? And so people always ask, is it too soon and too early for our kids to learn about race? Well, for the rest of us, we learn at the age of 5 when we get dropped off at school and someone says, why is your skin color the color of poo? And you're like, what? I speak no English. My skin color is the color of poo? I had no idea. How come there's green stuff in your kebabs? And you're like, don't all kebabs have green stuff? So you learn very quickly that you're the other. And you internalize this when you watch Hollywood movies and TV shows, which I used to inhale as a kid. I remember seeing all these 80s action movies where Chuck Norris goes and kills this brown bouillabaisse of terrorists in the Middle East. And you're watching Back to the Future, an amazing movie where randomly there's these Libyan terrorists. And you end up watching Spies Like Us, where they're in Pakistan. And you're sitting there at home like, yay, Pakistan. And you're like, wait a second, that person's in brownface. And you realize very quickly, even watching Indiana Jones Temple of Doom, where apparently all brown people eat monkey brains and chilled snakes. We do not eat monkey brains or chilled snakes. And you internalize this. You look at yourself in the mirror and you go, huh, I don't have the right skin tone. I don't have the right nose. I don't have the right hair. You learn to hate yourself. I was very lucky in that my parents did not give an F about me assimilating. They named me Wajahat. They didn't teach me English. But still, I remember one day I was 6 years old and I went home to my mom and I said, I would like an American name. I think you should change Wajahat to Wilbur. Why did I choose Wilbur and not like Walter or any other name? Is because we were reading Charlotte's Web at the time, The Power of Literature, as Kimberly was saying. And Wilbur was such a beloved character. And my mother, in her awesome, blunt immigrant fashion, said, your name is Wajahat. I also wanted to eat this mysterious dish called meatloaf because all my friends used to eat meatloaf. And I'm like, meat in the shape of a loaf. And I went home to my Ammi and I said, Ammi, can you make meatloaf? And Ammi's like, we are Pakistani. We do not eat meatloaf. We will be eating biryani. But you realize you will never be the protagonist of the narrative, right? So I took ESL, English as a second language. I was always the outsider. I was very brown and Muslim. And I ended up being the token brown guy and Muslim guy oftentimes throughout school. the cultural ambassador of my people. In a way, that was a training ground for the rest of my life, where I would have to be the walking Wikipedia of all things Muslimi and 1.7 billion people and 1,400 years of Islamic civilization in all things South Asia. Things were going good. I went to an all-boys Jesuit Catholic high school, Bellarmine, where I, the token Muslim, dominated every semester religious studies class, to the point where Father Allender, the priest, used to read the highest grades in the class, and his heart, I think his Jesuit heart cracked a little bit. But it was also this time where I was very shy, I was very sick, I was the token brown kid. I used to wear husky pants. Sorry for triggering anyone who's listening, but for those of you who know the enduring trauma and joy of husky pants, they used to be the pants in the Sears section where you used to walk past all the regular kids' pants section, and it used to be in Times, the 96 New Roman font on the back of your butt, husky. So basically, I was a winner growing up. And I remember it was in school where it was for the first time where I discovered my superpower. And I remember I was such a sick kid that I missed almost 35 days of school because I had horrible allergies. And Mrs. Peterson, who was a teacher from Kentucky, one time said, you got to write a 1-page short story. And the power of storytelling is this. I wrote a 10-page short story. And this was when Robin Hood Men in Tights, Robin Hood, actually Prince of Thieves, was coming out, starring Kevin Costner. And I remember the power of representation. In the movie, Morgan Freeman, whom we now know as the voice of God, played Azim, a Muslim sidekick who was also a badass. And I remember we as Muslim kids were like, oh my God, there's a Muslim character in a movie, in a blockbuster movie, Azim. And we saw the movie and we're like, he prays in a way no Muslim has ever prayed, but it's okay, we'll give him a pass. I wrote a 10-page story, Wajahat Ali's rendition of Robin Hood. Mrs. Peterson gave me an A++++ and said, you have to recite this story in front of your homeroom. And I'm like, please, Miss Peterson, I'm shy, I'm fat, don't make me do it. She goes, shut up and recite the story. So I recited the story in front of the bullies who used to make fun of me, because this was the 1980s, ladies and gentlemen. There was no Dove soap commercials about body positivity. There was no Lizzo. Back in the day, it was either you were normal or fat, and every day for a fat kid was World War III. I recited the story, and all the bullies who used to make fun of me were quiet. For 10 minutes, I had them, and they were laughing at all the right parts. And right then I discovered I might have a superpower. I went home and gave the story to my parents. My father read the story, was drinking chai, and he said, Beta, you have a talent. You should think about becoming a writer. But my mom ran and said, but first become a doctor. And I chart this journey in the book. There's another chapter called Do Something Useful, because my parents were Pakistani immigrants who came after 1965. And like many Asian immigrants who came, instead of chasing blackness, their natural allies, they chose whiteness, even though they never articulated it. They said, who's winning in America? Who's on top? Who's on the billboards? White people. Let us get as close as we can to white people, and let us be the model minority, one of the most toxic myths, which I talk about and I debunk in the book, that in exchange for us being shiny and nice and happy and never complaining, you will accept us. But the cost of it is invisibility. And so in Do Something Useful, I talk about how there were 3 occupations that us children of model minorities were told we could be: doctor, engineer, businessman, failure. I, of course, chose failure. But still, my parents nurtured that gift of storytelling. They said, you have a talent, keep doing it. I tried, I go to UC Berkeley, and everything's going well. I'm 20 years old, I'm a Muslim Student Association member, and the 2 towers fall. And overnight, we become us and them. Overnight, I'm no longer the model minority, I'm the terrorist. Overnight, without any training, I'm asked to condemn violent acts done by violent people I've never met. Overnight, I start getting hate mail. Even though 19 foreign hijackers brought down the 2 towers, me being Muslim in California and being told, why do you hate America? Your religion hates us. All of a sudden, Islam becomes the threat. And all of a sudden now in school, while I'm trying to figure out what to do with the rest of my life, because I'm an undeclared major, I actually ended up becoming an English major. I'm glad other people have husky pants. I'm glad I got the response from the other panelists. All of a sudden, I'm like, what do I do? And so what happens to young people is they're thrust, every generation is thrust into crisis, and you have to respond. And for my generation, especially Muslims, especially those who are Muslimi, there was always a pre 9/11 and a post 9/11, a fork in the road, right? Everything changed after that. And then 7 months after that, while I was about to graduate, I'm 21 years old, my parents get arrested. My parents both get arrested in something called Operation Cyberstorm, and they get whisked away for jail for 1 year, and for a case that takes about 10 years. And I leave school, and all of a sudden the American dream turns into the American nightmare. I'm the only child. I have to take care of 2 grandmothers. Their credit goes, the house goes, the property goes. The checklist of success, the model minority checklist of success blows up. We become homeless. I, for the next 10 years, have this sword hanging over my neck because my parents appealed the case. I got to take care of my family. In the book, I also talk about how our family has a history of OCD, anxiety disorders. I have to manage all of this while at the same time trying to create my career of being a writer. And I mention all of this in the book, this journey, a very personal journey, but connecting the dots about the American dream and the American nightmare, about being both us and both being them, about the power of storytelling, and how it was my play, Domestic Crusaders, right there, that my teacher, Ishmael Reed in college, told me to write in my senior year. As an African-American, he said, I see the news, I see what's happening to Muslims. You should write a story because art and storytelling is how we fought back. And the power of storytelling and writing is what gave me a second chance in life that allowed me to stand here, well, virtually, and talk to the rest of you. And the book ends, and I'm finishing up with 30 seconds I have left, with this chapter called Invest in Hope, but tie your camel first, which is a beautiful saying in Islam that says, sure, have faith in God, but tie your camel first. Means do everything within your power by your own hands to fix your situation. Even if you see the day of judgment coming around the corner, plant a seed. And so I end the book on this earned hope that our story is still being written, that young people, especially today, are facing climate change, racism, income inequality, the rise of fascism. But I have gone through these challenges and I have survived. And I still want you to invest in hope. I still want you to invest in a better story. And I want you to pick up the pen and become the protagonist of your own narrative. And if my story in some way can give you that hope, those lessons, that resilience, I hope maybe, just maybe, I can build this multicultural coalition that will stretch and expand this country to finally include the rest of us as its co-protagonists. Thank you for your time. Please purchase all the books. I really appreciate you all taking the time here today. And with that, I give it to Maria.
Hey, what's up, everybody? How are you? It's great to be with you. It's Maria Hinojosa, the author of Once I Was You, a memoir of love and hate in a tour in America. How's everybody doing? I wish I was there with you in California. You're in Florida. I wish I was with you in Florida. And it's great to be with you to have this conversation about first year experiences. So, hey, what's up? Okay, if you see something over here and all of a sudden you hear some yelping, it's because I have a little 10-week-old puppy. So, that's a little bit of what I've been doing as a first year experience. I've never been through something like this. I've never had a puppy, so it's really been a lot of fun. Anyway, it's great to be with you, and congratulations to my fellow authors and friends. And I've been thinking a lot about this experience of the first year. I'm still in the classroom. I like to joke that I'm a Mexican immigrant. That means I have 16 jobs all at the same time, never say no to work. And so one of my jobs is that I'm a professor at Barnard College, my alma mater. And I think a lot about the experience of many of my students who are first year students and who are the first in their families to go to college and have this experience. And I think a lot about my own experience the first year at Barnard. I write about it a lot in Once I Was You, and I write about it intensely in the upcoming young readers version of Once I Was You that will be out in September. And one of the things that I really enjoy writing about was what happened during my orientation when I got to Barnard in Columbia in my first year in 1979, a long time ago. And how a very kind of misogynistic experience, they were doing a reenactment of the dating game as part of our first year experiences. Maybe not the best thing to do. But I write about how actually that experience brought out the worst in me. And how seeing the worst in me in the sense of kind of a highly competitive experience, boys against girls kind of situation, very genderized, it allowed me to see the kind of person I didn't want to be in college. I wanted to be somebody who was about solidarity and not about, you know, especially in terms of women, kind of pitting ourselves against each other. And that was such an important experience. I also remember and write a lot about those first year friendships that remain to this day. I can name them, the people who I was with, who changed my life and who remain in my life today. And the other big theme for me that I think has connected with a lot of readers from Once I Was You is the imposter syndrome. And what is it to deal with the imposter syndrome? And what does it look like? And what does it feel like? And what are the strategies that we can use to combat the imposter syndrome? Because I didn't expect that this would be one of the things that actually connected deeply with readers, was by writing about the imposter syndrome. I have a great editor. She was able to see kind of thematically how there was going to be an interest in this particular theme of, because I was the first in all of the newsrooms where I worked, the first Latina in all of the newsrooms where I worked. And so the constant experience of kind of the out-of-body imposter syndrome and how disconcerting it can be, how disempowering it can be, how challenging it can be. And a lot of people, I appreciated that they would say, Maria, but you're so famous. Why would you write about the fact that you actually had imposter syndrome throughout much of your career? And it's because I want to avoid people having that sentiment. One of the things that I've done in terms of talking about the imposter syndrome and writing about the imposter syndrome is, is kind of giving a how-to of why the imposter syndrome is something that we can tackle. And my favorite word in tackling the imposter syndrome is actually empirically. I would use this word a lot when I was dealing with my own daughter and her anxiety at being at a high-performing elite private high school in New York City, and her sense of being an imposter. It was in that setting that she was teased, and that these young educated students were teasing her and telling Mexican jokes. So if that was happening in a high-performing elite private high school in New York City, we can imagine how that kind of attitude, in this case, telling Mexican jokes, is throughout. And how then you carry that sentiment when you start college, and how you internalize that experience and how it can be so disempowering. So why I write about the imposter syndrome is because I don't want young people to have to experience it for any minute longer than they have to. Now, when I talk about empirically combating the imposter syndrome, I like to create this image of you remember back in supermarkets when we would spend a lot of time in supermarkets before the pandemic, and at least in Harlem, in the hood, they would have the little the glass boxes where they would have a kind of jaw that would come down, a claw that would come and pick something up and take it and move it. And of course, you would never get anything. But this claw kind of, I asked people, when you experience the imposter syndrome, did you just feel like you were picked up out of that glass box and suddenly moved and dropped into a first year experience at, you name the college or university? If that's what it feels like, what you have to do is you have to put your feet on the ground empirically and realize everything that you've done to get you to this place. All of the steps that you have taken as a student to get to this place. And so it's a way in which you can kind of look at the imposter syndrome, but actually have a strategy for how to combat it, using this word empirically. Because the truth is that one of the things we have to acknowledge is that as young people and as students in these first year experiences, they are carrying a tremendous amount of insecurity. And so what we're trying to do is to make it, the experience, one that is less insecure for you. Because what we want is, we want you to own all of your power and all of your experience and own all of your stories. So right now I'm a professor at Barnard College, my alma mater. And a lot of what I do in the class is I reaffirm the students in their experiences. I teach a class that's called American Narratives, because many of the students, many of them women, women who are not white, will feel like their experiences are, a minority experience. It's a word I don't use, by the way. I don't use the word minority. I don't use the word illegal. I don't use the word slave, enslaved person, in terms of minority, non-white. Illegal is never a term to use for a human being, so undocumented. And we ground the experience, right, in that everything that you have achieved because empirically you have been working towards this. And your story is not a minority story. Your story is an American story. It's one that has to be told. It's one that has to be shared. It's one that we learn from each other. So in my classroom, the first 2 classes entirely are spent simply in getting to know each other as students and as human beings. Because one of the things that I center is our humanity. So that in my class about immigration, we get to know each other. And in that experience, I'm able to say to students, the reporting on immigration is not about those people. The reporting on immigration is about the students who you have just met and who you are sharing the classroom with. So that we are not strangers, right? We are not strangers. For me, this is one of the essential things to communicate in the first year experience, is that we have ownership of our stories. We have to tell these stories. We have to own the power of telling these stories. That our stories are American stories. They are valuable stories. They are not outsider stories. And that you are not an outsider. That you belong here. And that you have this experience of so many authors who are saying we belong. As a professor, I spend a lot of time creating that community experience of belonging in a very safe setting that allows the students to become vulnerable. And the first person who becomes vulnerable in that setting is me. And thankfully, because I've written this book, Once I Was You, then there's so much vulnerability that happens in this book. I wasn't expecting it, but there's a tremendous amount of vulnerability that comes through in this book. And I think people were not expecting it either. But to me, the experience of vulnerability is what allows us to learn in humility and to transform that sense of not feeling like we belong, transforming that and saying, we belong. We own this experience. We are not imposters. We belong. And I hope you all are able to transmit that to all of the young people in their first year experiences. And I hope that Once I Was You becomes a part of that and a catalyst for conversation about not just the imposter syndrome, but being the first and being vulnerable and finding strength in that. So thank you so much. I hope you're having a great time. I'm in a winter wonderland. Everything is white all around me, although of course it's nighttime now. So I hope you're enjoying the warmth of Florida. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks, everybody, for coming. Thank you to our authors. We're sorry we missed you this year, but we look forward to seeing you in Los Angeles. Take care.